4 minutes ago, everything changed inside Buckingham Palace. The palace has just finished a secret midnight meeting to completely change who runs the monarchy. Behind locked doors, the Privy Council held a surprise vote. They officially stripped Queen Camilla of her power over state papers and handed the high title of Senior Counsellor of State directly to Princess Catherine. In just seconds, the top position Camilla spent her whole life fighting for was completely taken away. But the most shocking part happened when the final decision was read out loud. The sudden betrayal was too much for the Queen to handle. Her face turned pale, she lost her balance, and she suddenly collapsed onto the floor before anyone could catch her. We are going to look at the exact palace secrets behind this midnight vote. But first, make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss a single update. To truly understand this nightmare, we have to step inside that closed room. This was not a normal meeting. The Privy Council is a powerful group of top politicians and judges. Usually their meetings are just quick, boring paperwork checks. But this midnight assembly was a carefully planned trap. She sat down rigidly right next to King Charles. She had no idea that a quiet plan to remove her had been growing behind her back for months. Across the long table, Prince William and Princess Catherine sat in total silence. Catherine kept her eyes down, refusing to show any victory. William sat stone-faced, watching the room like a hawk. Suddenly, the clerk of the council stood up and opened a thick leather file. The document stated that because King Charles was dealing with growing health issues, the palace had to activate the Regency Act. Under this rule, the council had the power to vote on who handles the king's official daily paperwork. The sudden midnight choice made by the Privy Council did not appear out of thin air. To understand the sheer depth of this legal ambush, one must look at the hidden architecture of the British Regency Act of 1937. While the public views the monarchy as a fairy tale institution of crowns and golden carriages, the British state treats it as a cold corporate entity that cannot tolerate operational downtime. Under the strict terms of constitutional law, if a reigning monarch suffers from documented, mounting health limitations that prevent the continuous signature of state documentation, the machinery of government does not grind to a halt. Instead, specific legislative triggers are automatically activated behind closed doors. The Privy Council holds the explicit, unappealable authority to determine if the sovereign's daily capacity has crossed a dangerous threshold. For months, senior politicians, cabinet members, and constitutional lawyers had been quietly tracking the time delays on the king's red boxes, the leather cases containing top-secret intelligence briefings, foreign treaties, and domestic bills requiring the royal sign-off. When the administrative lag began threatening the weekly schedules of the Prime Minister's office, a secret petition was filed within the Privy Council office at Whitehall. It wasn't a malicious plot. It was a bureaucratic cleanup operation designed to protect the executive functions of the realm. Camilla had spent her entire life believing her status as Queen Consort protected her from political interference, but she failed to realize that the British state ultimately serves the continuity of the crown, not the personal desires of the people who wear it. When the midnight ballot was forced through the room, it was the cold victory of statutory law over royal sentiment. Camilla watched the clerk, waiting for her husband to stand up and protect her. For years, Charles always stopped any attacks against Camilla, but this time, the king did not move a muscle. He kept his hands completely flat on the table and stared straight down. His absolute silence carried more weight than any speech. The clerk then read the final, crushing sentence. The vote was unanimous. Camilla was officially removed from her position of authority. Princess Catherine was now the new Senior Counsellor of State, taking over all power immediately. Camilla's fingers gripped the edge of the table. She looked at Charles with deep hurt, begging him to fight back. But the king's silence told her everything. He was letting it happen. The shock was simply too much. Camilla pushed her chair back, tried to stand up, but completely lost her balance. She collapsed heavily onto the Persian rug. The room broke into instant chaos. Officials stood up in a panic. Prince William immediately ordered a total lockdown of the palace, screaming that no one was allowed to leave the room. But as William picked up the official papers from the table, his eyes fell on a tiny note at the bottom of the page, and that single detail changed the entire story. To understand exactly what Prince William found at the bottom of that page, We have to leave the midnight council room completely. We must look back at a secret incident from May 12, 2026, that the public was never allowed to see. Every major royal crisis has one small moment that looks totally insignificant until history circles back to it. For this crisis, that moment happened inside Windsor Castle during a private ceremonial rehearsal for the upcoming state opening. There were no cheering crowds, no reporters, and no announcements on that Tuesday morning. The session was arranged to settle simple rules for future state occasions, deciding exactly who stands where, who enters first, and who represents the crown if duties shift. Camilla walked into that rehearsal expecting her authority to remain untouched. She believed that under the September 2022 accession directives, everyone answered to her. But she quickly noticed that Princess Catherine's responsibilities were quietly growing right beside William. Suddenly, an unexpected instruction came from the Queen. Camilla's voice stayed perfectly controlled, but her words were razor sharp. She ordered staff to remove Catherine from her principal position in the lineup and move her further back into the shadows. The meaning was unmistakable. Camilla looked directly at Catherine and made it clear there could only be one queen beside the crown. Catherine quietly asked William not to escalate the situation, but the humiliation was already done. She had been corrected right in front of senior household staff, but Prince William refused to stay silent. He challenged Camilla's order on the spot, arguing that the setup already reflected Catherine's future duties. He understood this wasn't just about where someone stood in a room, it touched the succession itself. The written account generated by the ceremony secretary following the May 12, 2026, Windsor rehearsal was far more damaging than Camilla ever anticipated. Inside the inner household of Buckingham Palace, power is not measured solely by official titles. It is dictated by daily proximity, staff allegiances, and the control of administrative precedents. When Camilla explicitly ordered the ceremony secretary to alter the procession lineup, she wasn't just adjusting a physical formation. She was issuing a direct bureaucratic command designed to freeze Catherine out of the core operational circle of the impending state opening. According to leaked reports from senior household staff, the argument carried on long after the principal royals left the Windsor side room. Prince William took the immediate step of scheduling an emergency audience with the master of the household, asserting that any attempt to diminish Catherine's public role violated the long-term strategic transition planning agreed upon during the late Queen's final years. The ceremony secretary, caught between the competing instructions of the Queen Consort's office and the Prince of Wales's team, chose to log the entire incident with absolute clinical precision. The resulting document, officially catalogued as an internal household memorandum, explicitly noted that the Queen Consort's personal directives were introducing operational friction into state event planning. William didn't leak the document to the press. He quietly sent a copy directly to the clerk of the Privy Council. For 3 months, that single piece of paper sat silently inside a secure electronic folder, transforming a private family dispute into an official piece of state evidence regarding institutional stability. The disagreement did not fade away when the rehearsal ended. Because the argument altered a formally agreed plan, the ceremony secretary had to write an official household record of the fight, preserving every detail of William's objection. Camilla dismissed the written paper as minor administrative nonsense. She assumed the argument was entirely over. She had no idea that text was being saved in a locked archive, waiting for the exact moment the council needed evidence to justify her downfall. While the public was waking up to a completely normal morning in London, inside the palace walls, Camilla's world was already changing forever. The cruelest part of an institutional coup doesn't happen during the shouting in the boardroom. It arrives the next morning through tiny, quiet changes that are completely impossible to ignore. Camilla woke up inside the quiet palace medical suite after recovering from her sudden collapse. Out of habit, she immediately looked around the room for her standard morning council briefing folder. For years, this red folder arrived at her door at the exact same time, carrying daily updates on her charities, patronages, and royal duties. This morning, the table was completely empty. When she softly asked a household aide where her paperwork was, the aide looked down and spoke in a quiet, trembling voice. The briefing folders were not late. They had been permanently rerouted. They were already sitting on Princess Catherine's desk. No one slammed the door. No one yelled in the corridors. Yet with every quiet adjustment, the terrifying message became clearer. The title was gone, and the palace machinery was already moving forward entirely without her. Meetings were being systematically wiped from Camilla's calendar. Staff members who once waited for her direct commands were suddenly answering to a completely different office. But as Camilla sat by her untouched breakfast tray processing the shock, she realized the missing folders were just the beginning. The deeper betrayal was still waiting for her inside that very room, but the missing briefing folders were only the surface of a much larger institutional operation. As Prince William stood in the quiet palace corridor that morning reviewing the final council paperwork, the true depth of the trap finally became clear. This was not a sudden decision born from a heated argument inside the council chamber. The entire framework of the midnight vote had been meticulously engineered piece by piece behind closed doors weeks before Camilla ever arrived at the meeting. To understand how this administrative trap was built, the story must move back to July 2nd, 2026, inside a private meeting room at the Privy Council office in Whitehall. On that afternoon, Prince William met secretly with the Lord President of the Council and a small group of senior constitutional lawyers. They were not discussing daily royal schedules. They were looking closely at the original legal archives from April 2005, the exact marriage waivers signed before Charles and Camilla's wedding. Back in 2005, public resistance had forced the palace to draft a strict legal agreement stating that Camilla would only ever hold the title of princess consort, intentionally leaving the higher title of queen open for the future line of succession. While King Charles had attempted to bypass those old restrictions during his 2023 coronation, the lawyers uncovered a massive constitutional loophole. Because the 2005 waivers were never formally dissolved by an act of parliament, the Privy Council still held the legal authority to enforce them if the stability of the crown was ever placed at risk. William placed the official written record of the May Windsor rehearsal on the table. He argued that Camilla's deliberate attempt to alter the approved state procession line was not just a minor family disagreement. It was active proof that her personal authority was colliding with the monarchy's planned transition. Over those quiet afternoon hours in July, the team quietly drafted the emergency decree under the Regency Act. They did not launch an immediate attack. They simply waited for the exact moment King Charles's health restrictions gave them the legal opening to strike. The narrative returns directly to the present day inside the palace medical suite, where the high-stakes political drama turns into a raw family confrontation. The heavy double doors push open, and King Charles steps into the quiet room alone. He looks visibly exhausted, the physical strain of his office showing completely on his face. He removes his reading glasses, places them onto the bedside table, and hesitates before speaking. Camilla cuts through his hesitation. Immediately, her voice trembling with intense hurt, she fiercely demands to know how he could sit completely silent at the mahogany table while his own counsel and his eldest son ambushed her in the dark. She tells him that the palace officials managed to completely erase decades of her hard work before she could even understand what was happening. Charles steps closer and offers his hand, but Camilla coldly pulls hers away, refusing to look at him. The king looks down at the floor and delivers the most devastating psychological blow of the entire crisis. He admits that he knew about the secret council meetings, and he confesses that he signed the final authorization page himself weeks before the vote took place. He explains to her that protecting her position indefinitely was creating a deep crisis for the country. If he appeared willing to preserve her authority despite the growing legal objections from the Privy Council, his loyalty as a husband would be seen as stronger than his primary duty as the monarch. He tells her softly that he had to choose the crown. Camilla looks back at him with wounded disbelief, realizing that the real battle was never between her and Catherine. Her husband had authorized the paperwork, allowing her to walk into that chamber entirely unprepared. With the brutal realization of the king's signature sinking in, the entire constitutional crisis shifted from a cold battle over legal ranks into a deeply human reckoning behind closed doors. That evening, the public world was finally waking up to the massive institutional shift. Outside Victoria Station, Special night editions of the newspapers hit the stands with two massive words printed across the front page: "A new queen." Television commentators abandoned their scheduled programming to debate what the midnight vote meant, but inside the palace walls, the actual players were dealing with the raw emotional cost of the crown. Catherine refused to celebrate the outcome. In fact, an unexpected message reached Camilla's medical room through a senior household aide. Catherine had flatly refused to move into Camilla's former private office, instructing the domestic staff to leave every personal item, photograph, and document exactly where it was until the former queen consort decided what should happen to them. Catherine had seen the physical collapse in the chamber, and she understood that any success she achieved in this new role would always be linked to another woman's public humiliation. She had no desire to turn an institutional transition into a personal punishment. Recognizing this gesture, Camilla made a definitive choice of her own. She wrote a short handwritten note requesting a second meeting with the new Senior Counsellor of State. She made only one strict condition clear: no advisors, no political officials, and no messages carried through household staff. She wanted the absolute truth directly, face to face. Catherine respected the request and arrived entirely alone, leaving her security and press teams outside the heavy double doors of the private sitting room. When the two women stood several feet apart, the fierce anger that had filled the midnight council room had completely burned down into something much quieter and far more dangerous. There were no palace documents between them now. For the first time since the crisis began, they spoke not as royal symbols, but as two people caught in the machinery of the state. Camilla spoke first, her voice steady but deeply weary. She admitted that losing the title and having her daily schedule erased had wounded her pride, but it was not the deepest cut. What had truly broken something inside her was the realization that her marriage could no longer shield her from the demands of the monarchy. For decades, she believed Charles would always stand as her final protector, but the signed council dossier proved that even the king had to surrender to the will of the crown. Catherine listened without a single interruption, holding Camilla's gaze before offering a powerful truth of her own. She confessed that inheriting this massive responsibility did not feel like a victory. It felt like a heavy, crown-shaped burden that she could no longer postpone. She knew that every future public appearance she made would be heavily measured against the moment Camilla collapsed, and that the public would always view her rise as a product of Camilla's downfall. Before turning to leave, Camilla reached into her bag and pulled out a small handwritten notebook. It didn't contain official state secrets or legal frameworks. Instead, it was filled with decades of personal notes, warnings, hidden pressures, and small survival lessons that no official palace briefing could ever explain to a future queen. She handed the notebook to Catherine without any formal ceremony. It was not a sign of absolute surrender, but it was a quiet acknowledgement that the midnight transfer would stand, and that the monarchy needed to move forward. As the sun began to set, the family finally found a fragile peace behind the locked gate. The final meaning of the crisis was not found in the text of the Regency Act, but in what each person chose to do after the papers were signed. King Charles met Camilla privately one last time to apologize for allowing his royal duties to turn into operational secrecy. William stood beside Catherine, watching the evening news reports and preparing her for the immense public pressure that was about to follow. By 9 a.m. on the morning following the midnight vote, the internal palace transition was already being reflected across global diplomatic channels. While British television networks scrambled to adjust their live broadcasts, the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office was quietly sending encrypted notifications to every major British embassy and high commission around the world. The official instruction was clear: all formal documentation, state dinner seating protocols, and diplomatic briefing papers had to be updated instantly to reflect Princess Catherine's new status as Senior Counsellor of State. Inside the palace, the speed of the administrative changeover was chilling. Camilla's personal private secretary arrived at her office only to find two security officials waiting outside the door. They politely but firmly informed her that the office space was being audited, and that all future communications regarding international patronages had to be channeled directly through the Prince and Princess of Wales's administrative team at Kensington Palace. No voices were raised, and no dramatic confrontations took place in the public eye. The state was simply executing a pre-planned software update on the monarchy. As the media cameras gathered outside the heavy iron gates of Buckingham Palace, the global public began debating the moral cost of the transition, completely unaware that the real battle had already been fought, won, and coded into the legal history of the United Kingdom before the sun had even risen over London. The transfer was completely finalized. Outside the main gates, crowds gathered behind the security barriers, some holding photographs of Catherine while others openly expressed sympathy for Camilla. The ultimate split-screen image captured the changing of the guard. Catherine's vehicle entering through the main palace arches to take her place at the center of the state, while Camilla's car quietly departed through a side gate, fading away into the dark London mist. One era had abruptly closed, and the crown had officially secured its future.